The air inside the private clinic was unnaturally still. A sterile silence hung over the white walls and glass panels, broken only by the faint hum of the life support monitors. Alexander Vale sat in the reclined surgical chair, his hands resting motionless on the armrests. The billionaire who once ruled the world of innovation now sat on the edge of rebirth. The faint scent of antiseptic burned his nose. Beneath the surface calm, his heartbeat thudded heavy and slow, the rhythm of fear and hope tangled together. "Are you sure about this, Mr. Vale?" asked Drive. Harada, the Japanese neurosurgeon whose experimental procedure could either restore Alexander's sight or destroy what remained of his optic nerves forever. Her gloved hands paused above the tray of microscopic instruments, waiting for his answer. Alexander tilted his head slightly toward the sound of her voice. His eyes, still wrapped in the black lenses he had worn for years, reflected the dim surgical light. "I've been in the dark long enough," he said quietly. "I built a world I can't even see. It's time." The doctor nodded. Two assistants began preparing the anesthetic. The hum of machines grew louder. Alexander tried to steady his breath, but the flood of memories came unbidden. The screeching tires, the blinding explosion of glass, the sound of his brother Ethan's voice on the phone just before the crash. "I'll handle everything, Alex." That was 15 years ago. He had accepted the story of an accident, until small cracks began to appear in that narrative. Documents missing, unexplained decisions in his company, the nagging feeling that someone had chained him in darkness for a reason. As the anesthesia crept into his veins, Alexander's last conscious thought was a vow. "If I open my eyes again, I will find out who did this to me." When he woke, there was silence. A different kind of silence, one thick with suspense, heavy with potential. His face was bandaged, the world still hidden behind gauze. "Doctor." Harada's calm voice reached him. "The operation went well. You'll need a few hours before we remove the dressings. There might be disorientation at first." Alexander nodded faintly, though his throat was dry. He waited. Minutes crawled into hours. He could hear footsteps outside, whispers between nurses. The night fell beyond the glass windows, unseen yet deeply felt. He imagined the world beyond, the skyline of his city, the empire that bore his name, the faces of those who had spoken to him all these years, knowing he couldn't see the truth in theirs. When Dr. Harada finally returned, she stood beside him with quiet gravity. "Mr. Vale," she said softly, "are you ready?" He didn't speak. He simply raised his chin. Her fingers moved gently, unwinding the gauze layer by layer. The light began as a faint burn behind his eyelids, a warmth, a trembling brightness that frightened him more than he expected. Then, for the first time in 15 years, he opened his eyes. A flood of colors, shadows, and shapes rushed at him like a storm. He blinked rapidly, his eyes watering. The white walls, the silver tools, the delicate trembling of Harada's hand, it was overwhelming. He covered his face, trembling with a sound that was half sob, half laugh. "Take your time," she whispered. He lowered his hand slowly, breathing through the shock. The world was real again. Solid, sharp, terrifyingly vivid, every detail, every flicker of movement stabbed at his senses like light through crystal. "Doctor." Harada smiled faintly. "Your vision is restored." He looked at her, studying the subtle confidence in her expression, the honesty in her eyes. For the first time, he could truly see the woman who had risked everything to bring him back to light. But even in that moment of triumph, a shadow crossed his mind. He couldn't tell anyone, not yet. The people around him, the ones who had guided his empire, couldn't know he could see. Because now, with sight restored, Alexander Vale would finally uncover what had been done to him, and to do that, he would need to remain blind a little longer. The morning light streamed through the tall windows of Alexander's penthouse, painting the marble floors with gold. For years, he had imagined what sunlight might look like when it spilled across his home. Now he could finally see it, and the sight felt almost unreal. He stood quietly by the window, pretending to listen to the sounds of the city below while his personal assistant, Clara, arranged the morning briefings. She believed he was still blind. Everyone did. "Good morning, Mr. Vale," she said, her voice as professional and polished as always. "You have a call with the board at 10, and Ethan asked if you'd like him to join." Alexander's lips twitched slightly. "Ethan." The brother who had taken over much of the company's public operations after Alexander's accident, the same brother whose voice still haunted his dreams from that night. No, he replied calmly, keeping his eyes turned toward the window. Tell him I'll manage on my own. Clara nodded, her heels clicking softly across the marble as she moved around the room. Alexander watched her carefully, the quick glances at her reflection in the glass, the slight hesitation before she spoke, the way she picked up a document and slipped it quietly into her folder. Something she didn't want him to know about. 15 years of blindness had taught him to listen, but now he could see the subtleties hidden between words. Every gesture, every glance, every lie. When she left, he walked to his desk. His fingers traced the surface. Smooth, cool, familiar, but his eyes were what did the work now. He studied the files arranged neatly in front of him. One in particular, marked Foundation Transfers, caught his attention. The numbers didn't align with what he'd been told. Millions routed to unknown accounts through his charity arm, the same foundation meant to provide free prosthetics for the disabled. He sat down slowly, his mind racing. For years, Ethan had told him the foundation was running at a loss. Now he could see why. Someone was siphoning money under the cover of philanthropy. And if the fake reports and false signatures meant anything, it wasn't just anyone. It was orchestrated by someone with access to everything, someone like Ethan. Later that afternoon, Alexander decided to attend a meeting. He wore his dark glasses, holding his cane as he entered the glass-walled boardroom. Around the long table sat his top executives, men and women who had once treated him like a visionary. Now, he watched them. Some fidgeted, others avoided his direction entirely. Their eyes darted toward Ethan, who was standing near the end of the table, tall and self-assured. "Brother," Ethan greeted, with a warm smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're early." Alexander tilted his head toward the voice, pretending to orient himself. "I like to hear the room before I speak." The words were casual, but the hidden meaning struck him deeply. He heard plenty, and now, he saw more. The meeting began. Ethan presented charts and figures about the company's latest project, a global AI security system. But as the slides reflected on the glass walls, Alexander noticed something: the same offshore accounts listed in the Foundation report, subtly embedded in the project's expense codes. His hands tightened around the cane. "I must say, Ethan," he said evenly, "you've been busy." Ethan smiled again. "Only for you, brother. Someone has to keep your empire standing." When the meeting ended, the others left, leaving the brothers alone. Ethan poured himself a drink. "You know, Alex," he said lightly, "sometimes I wonder if you even realize how much I've done for you. The deals I've saved, the people I've managed. I'm grateful," Alexander said softly, turning his head slightly toward him. "Though sometimes I wonder who you're managing them for." Ethan froze for the briefest second, then laughed it off, too easily. Still suspicious, even without sight. Some things never change. As Ethan left the room, Alexander lowered his glasses slightly. Through the reflection of the window, he watched his brother's face, the coldness, the calculation. The mask dropped when he thought no one could see him. For the first time since the surgery, Alexander felt something sharp stir in his chest. Not fear, not even anger. It was clarity. The world around him had become a web of deceit, glittering and dangerous under the light. And while everyone thought the blind billionaire was still groping in darkness, he was watching, every move, every betrayal, every truth hiding in plain sight. The city below glittered like a circuit board at night, alive, buzzing, oblivious to the storm that brewed in Alexander's world. From the balcony of his penthouse, he stood alone, staring into the darkness that had once been his home. The skyline looked sharper than he imagined, its beauty almost cruel. For 15 years, he had relied on others to describe it to him, their words carefully chosen, curated, perhaps even manipulated. Now, with his vision restored, he realized that every story told to him was a version of truth designed to control him. Inside, the glow of his monitors cast shifting patterns across the room. He sat before them, hands steady, eyes scanning the data feeds and private security footage his tech team believed were being interpreted for him by audio systems. What they didn't know was that Alexander had installed a hidden layer of surveillance, one that fed directly to his personal terminal. He could now watch the unfiltered truth. A few keystrokes later, he pulled up a series of encrypted files, board communications, internal chat logs, and archived footage. He watched in silence as the screen filled with evidence. There was Clara, his trusted assistant, meeting Ethan late at night in the private lounge at Vale Industries. She handed him a tablet, whispering something that made Ethan smirk. In another clip, Ethan stood before a group of executives, discussing redirections of funds and projects under the guise of philanthropy. Alexander leaned back, his jaw tightening. It wasn't just corporate theft. It was betrayal orchestrated with precision, a web spun while he lived in darkness. His empire wasn't his anymore. It belonged to Ethan. He replayed the video again, focusing on his brother's expression. The charm, the confidence, all a facade. But behind that smile was something colder. The man who had once promised to protect him had used his blindness as a weapon. Every deal, every signature, every whisper of sympathy had been another strand in the trap. The next morning, Alexander invited Clara to his study. He needed to be sure. She entered with her usual calm, dressed perfectly, every movement controlled. "You wanted to see me, sir?" she asked. "Yes," Alexander said, his voice low but steady. "I wanted to talk about loyalty." Clara blinked. "Loyalty?" He nodded, still facing away as if he couldn't see. "It's a rare thing, especially in a world built on money and power. Tell me, Clara, have you ever lied to me?" There was a pause, small, but it told him everything. He turned slightly, keeping his gaze hidden behind his dark glasses. "I've always done what's best for you, Mr. Vale," she replied, carefully. "Best for me," he repeated. "Or for Ethan." Her breath caught, barely audible, but enough for him to hear it. He stood slowly, his presence suddenly larger, more commanding. "You've been with me for 8 years, Clara. You've managed every appointment, every file, every call. Don't insult me by pretending you don't know what's happening inside my own company." Clara's mask cracked. Her eyes darted toward the door before she forced a polite smile. "You're tired, sir. Maybe you should rest." "Sit down," Alexander interrupted sharply. The command in his tone froze her. She sat. For a long moment, neither spoke. The tension was suffocating. Then, Alexander leaned forward slightly and said, "I don't need eyes to see the truth, Clara. I never did, but now that I have them, I see everything." Her composure shattered. She lowered her gaze, her voice trembling. "He said you'd never find out. That it was for your protection. The company needed stability after your accident. So he made sure I stayed blind," Alexander finished quietly. Tears welled in her eyes. "He's dangerous, Mr. Vale. You don't understand what he's capable of." "I understand perfectly," Alexander said. "And that's why he can't know what I'm capable of." He dismissed her, watching as she left with shaking hands. The door closed behind her, and Alexander stood in the silence. His reflection stared back at him from the glass wall, eyes alive, sharp, and burning with purpose. The truth was out now, but it wasn't enough. He needed proof that would destroy Ethan completely. And for that, he would have to walk back into the world as the man everyone still believed to be blind, a predator hiding in plain sight, waiting for the moment to strike. The boardroom was silent except for the hum of the projector and the faint tapping of Ethan's polished shoes against the marble floor. Every seat was filled, executives, investors, and advisors, all waiting for the quarterly address from the enigmatic Alexander Vale, the blind visionary who had built their empire from darkness. Cameras were rolling for the internal live stream, broadcasting to every department worldwide. But no one knew the real reason for this meeting. Alexander sat at the head of the table, his cane resting beside him, dark glasses concealing the secret he had carried for weeks. Ethan stood near the large display screen, confident and charming as always. His voice flowed like practiced music. "Vale Industries," he announced, "stands at the edge of a new era. With our upcoming merger, we'll secure control over the world's leading defense AI network. This is the future Alexander dreamed of." There were nods of approval around the room. Alexander remained still, his hands folded neatly. His expression gave away nothing. But inside, the storm had reached its peak. Every document, every video, every confession, all meticulously collected and now ready to be unveiled. He just needed Ethan to reveal one final piece, his own guilt. When Ethan turned toward him with a polished smile, Alexander spoke, his voice low but clear. "It's impressive, brother. You've done well for the company. But before we continue, I want to discuss transparency." Ethan hesitated for the briefest moment, his eyes narrowing. "Transparency. Yes," Alexander said, leaning forward. "It's a word people like to use when they have something to hide. Isn't that right?" A murmur rippled through the room. Ethan laughed lightly, masking his discomfort. "You always had a dramatic way of making a point. What exactly are you implying?" Alexander gestured toward the technician by the projector. "Play the footage." Ethan's smile faltered. The lights dimmed. On the screen, the first video began, grainy footage from the company's private lounge. Ethan and Clara, their voices low, discussing fund transfers and falsified audits. Then another clip, a meeting between Ethan and a government official, talking about selling access to Vale's classified AI data. The room grew colder with every passing second. Ethan tried to speak. This is manipulated. He can't even see." That was the moment Alexander had been waiting for. Slowly, he removed his dark glasses and raised his head. His piercing blue eyes locked onto Ethan's. The room gasped. "I can see just fine," Alexander said. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan's face drained of color. I had my sight restored weeks ago," Alexander continued, his tone calm but laced with steel. "And I used it to watch. To see what my blindness had hidden all these years. You stole from me. You betrayed me. You turned my company into your playground of corruption." Security guards appeared at the door, standing by Alexander's signal. Ethan's voice cracked with anger. "You think you can expose me and walk away clean? You'd destroy your own legacy." "My legacy was already destroyed the day you made me blind," Alexander said, rising to his feet. "The day you decided I didn't deserve the truth." The footage ended. The lights returned, illuminating Ethan's trembling hands and the stunned faces around the table. The board members whispered among themselves, some in disbelief, others in disgust. Alexander turned to them. "Every transaction, every illegal contract, every stolen fund, all of it is now in the hands of the authorities. Vale Industries will be rebuilt, but not on lies." Ethan's composure finally shattered. "You think this makes you a hero? You're nothing without me." Alexander walked toward him slowly, stopping just inches away. "You're wrong," he said softly. "I was nothing because of you." Security moved in. Ethan struggled, shouting as they restrained him, but his words were drowned out by the sound of the boardroom doors closing. When the chaos subsided, Alexander stood alone. He turned toward the city visible through the glass wall, the skyline gleaming beneath the morning sun. His reflection stared back at him, no longer the blind man the world once pitied, but a man who had finally seen the truth, no matter how much it burned. He reached up, almost instinctively, and touched the edge of his glasses. For a moment, he considered putting them back on. Sight had given him answers, but it had also shown him the ugliness of greed, deceit, and human ambition. He walked to the window, whispering to the city below. Maybe darkness was never the curse. His voice softened. Maybe it was the shield. And as the light poured over him, Alexander Vale finally understood that the truth, once seen, could never be unseen.